Hello, welcome to an Easter gardener's world. And here in the orchard, the daffodils are at their very best. These are delicate, small, wild daffodils, the Pseudonarcissus. And we planted the first batch, I guess, about 20 years ago. They were very slow to get going. They just in dribs and drabs year on year, and now they're really taking off. In fact, all over the garden, despite the sort of erratic, sometimes quite wild weather that we've had over the last month, the signs of spring, some a little coy, some with enthusiasm, are peeping up and popping out all over the place. And do you know, one of the best signs of spring is when the weeds start to grow. If you've got vigorous weeds popping up all over the place, that means the soil is warming up and things are growing. And if weeds can grow, it means the plants you want can grow too. So if you see the weeds, a really good reason to get out there and make the most of spring. On tonight's programme, we visit a garden that's not only full of bright summer colour, it's also a bit of an experiment. And Carol is enjoying one of the stars of the spring, Helleborus. And I shall be planting my potatoes and also potting up some lilies in glorious summer colour and fragrance. Come on. Normal cold weather, and I call normal down to -5 or 6, generally the garden can cope with it. But we had one night in December when it went down to -14, and that was much too cold for a few plants. And none showed that more dramatically than these bay trees. This is Laurus nobilis, the sweet bay, which of course we use in cooking, which is why it's here in the herb garden. But it's also a decorative plant. They're not decorative any longer. Overnight, all the leaves turn brown. Now they look stone dead, but before you give up on them, there's a little test you can do. Get a knife and just scrape along a branch or the stem. And there you can see it's green. And if it's green, it's alive. So it's not killed, it's been badly damaged. So the next step is how can I repair that damage? Well, I can bring a leaf back to life. So anything that is clearly dead must come off, probably. If they're decorative like this, clip all those leaves off, and all you're going to be left is bare branches. They're going to look not great. And in the case of these cones, it's quite likely if you've got bare branches, that's just going to look silly. So what I'm going to do in this case is dig them all up, put them into recycled pots, and then grow them on and observe how they recover. If I have to cut them right back, so be it. And next winter, if they are good, I will move them undercover. The crucial thing with these plants, any plant really, is the roots. If the roots are healthy and good, then they will regrow. I've also mixed up a very free-draining mix. And by free-draining, all that means is I've added plenty of grit. These are Mediterranean plants, and drainage is really important. It should sprout new leaves, and it may well look good enough to bring back here into the herb garden by the end of summer. Now, whilst these really don't like extreme cold, there are plants that have adapted to it. In fact, some plants are at their very best when the weather is potentially at its worst. And Carol has been to the West Midlands to celebrate one of the most glorious of those winter flowers.
As winter turns gradually into spring, the garden can be a gloomy place, but there's one plant that illuminates everywhere, near and far. It's the hellebore. Hellebores belong to the broad family of Ranunculaceae, the buttercups, and when you glance at a hellebore, you can immediately see the resemblance. These lovely rounded buds open into chalice-like flowers. And the flowers themselves, you'd think these were petals, but they're not. They're sepals. They last much longer than petals, and they protect all the inner workings of the flower. When you look inside and there's a ring of nectaries, and above those are stamens with anthers covered in pollen. So these plants are rich in both nectar and pollen, and they're an absolute feast for pollinating insects. Hellebores are amongst the most accommodating and affable plants, providing you ensure that the soil they're growing in is rich in organic matter. And even if you haven't got a garden, you can still grow them in pots. Look at these beautiful examples. Just remember, since you are limiting their growing space, that you grow them in loam-based compost and that you give them an occasional feed. A good liquid organic feed is ideal. Top up the pots every so often because you want to maintain that spectacular performance. There are several different species of hellebores. Most of them come from Central Europe, but there are two native to the British Isles. This is one of them. This is Helleborus foetidus. It's called the stinking hellebore in common parlance. I actually quite like the smell. It's a bit roast beefy, and that's coming from a vegetarian. But I adore the plant with its great stems of lots of small, rounded flowers. Each one of them is rimmed in scarlet. There's another native hellebore too, which is called viridis, but it's a dinky, dainty little thing, a complete contrast to this, which is big, bold, beautiful. Enterprising plant breeders saw the potential of crossing some of these different species from different places, and they've come up with some brilliant results. The most popular are forms of Helleborus hybridus. There seems to be no end to the infinite variety of colours and forms, patterns and textures of these beautiful flowers. They can be almost any colour, from glowing yellow, virginal white, or dark and dramatic. Lots of them have beautiful markings, sometimes delicately veined, some with pickety edges. Many of them have anemone centres, and some fully double, with multiple sepals, frilly, frou-frou, and tremendously pretty. Well, you can be a plant breeder yourself. All you need to do is choose two that you think might make a good match. So this is the one I'm going to put the pollen onto. And you want a bud that's just beginning to open. That means that its own anthers inside are not producing any pollen yet. And then you want something that's got loads and loads of anthers, rich in pollen. And then you need very simple equipment, a pen with a black lid, and you just rub it on your jeans to create a bit of static. And it doesn't matter which of these flowers you choose, as long as they're loaded with pollen. You gently rub this lid over those anthers, and just gently rub the end of your pen with this pollen onto the stigma, the female bit. And then, so you remember which one it is, just cut a bit of embroidery thread or anything like that, and tie it round the flower that you've pollinated, and make a little note of what the parents were. And all you do then is wait. At the end of May, the beginning of June, collect your seed and then sow it straight away. It'll take a couple of years before you actually see the new flowers, but when you do, what excitement! It's not only that hellebores bridge that gap between the winter and the spring. They seem to be saying, this is our season, this is our time. Come on, let's get into the garden.
Some of you may know that a few weeks ago, Carol was awarded the Royal Horticultural Society's highest accolade, and that is the Victoria Medal of Honor. Very, very few people ever receive that, and it's richly deserved, and Carol, we're all very proud of you. Now, Carol did talk about the way that hellebores cross, and they produce this incredible variety of colours, but I've never seen this before. We've got a whole mass of purple hellebores, and within this one plant, most of the flowers are the same burgundy purple colour. But there, in amongst them, is one stem with a pure white flower. And if I cross that with another white flower, it wouldn't necessarily result in white. It could be purple, it could be a whole mixture. Hellebores tend to get worse every time they hybridize, every time they cross. And the way around it is to regularly buy new plants, plant them in amongst the old ones, so you're reinvigorating the gene pool. And that way you just keep them going, and they will go on and on and on, and they will flower for years to come. Easter time is traditionally when people planted their potatoes. First holiday since Christmas, and you can get out, and normally the weather is not too bad. It depends when Easter falls. But this year, we've all shared a tumultuous winter and early spring in the ground, or even if you don't have a garden or space to plant, you still can grow some spuds and start this weekend. The answer is to grow your potatoes in a container. I've got 3 different types of container which should work perfectly well. The first is the simplest of the lot, which is a recycled bag. This is a bag that had a wood chip mulch in, but a compost bag is the obvious one. If you've got a large pot, and this is a pot which actually a small tree came in, keep it, use it. Really ideal for growing potatoes. The important thing for both of them, remember, is you do need holes, drainage holes in the bottom. Whatever you're using must drain freely. And finally, I've come across this. This is a fairly new introduction. This is recycled polypropylene. It looks like felt, but actually, again, it is plastic. But the fact that someone is recycling it seems to me like a good idea and good news. It claims that the roots get air pruned. In other words, they start to grow through the sides of the bag, meet the air, they stop growing, therefore they're pruned, and they put their energy into becoming more fibrous. And the more fibrous the roots are, the more moisture they'll take up and the more nutrients. Therefore, it should result in a better crop of potatoes. Well, the only way to test it is to try all 3. So that's what I'm going to do. With all of them, put some compost in there. Put 4 scoops in each of them. Potatoes come in 3 types. First earlies, second earlies, and main crop. First earlies are your classic new potato. Most people harvest them mid to late summer. Second earlies, you put in a little bit later, and they can sort of double up as new potatoes and main crop. And the main crop are your standard potato that you can store all winter. They tend to be larger, and you harvest those sort of September and October. This is a new type I'm going to try called Casablanca. A first early, so a new potato that will be sweet and delicious in early summer, slightly waxy, so a good all-round potato. It is important not to put too many in each sack. If you put 4 or 5 in a container, you're going to end up with potatoes the size of marbles. So what I'm going to do is put 2 seed potatoes in each of these containers. Cover that up. And as long as the light is excluded, that's all we have to worry about at the moment. Give them a little bit of water. You don't want to let them dry out, but they shouldn't be sodden. They shouldn't really be exposed to hard frost. So if it's going to drop below -2 or 3, it's worth protecting them somehow, either with fleece or even lifting the bags up and bringing them indoors. And if you're thinking, well, why potatoes? It means you've never eaten a new potato harvested better than anything you've eaten before. Now, the beauty of these containers is that you can grow potatoes even if you live in the middle of a city. And city life is immeasurably improved by plants of all kinds, and particularly flowers. There's been a lot of research done on this. And Professor James Hitchmore of Sheffield University has been in the vanguard of both planting schemes and also researching what we plant in our urban areas. And last summer, we went to see him in his own garden.
I've been interested in plants for a long time, and I've been experimenting with for a long time. I think I've always had a very curious mind. I try to work out how we can design and manage plantings in cities more effectively. I work with environmental psychology approaches to understand what ordinary people might actually think of the appearance of that sort of vegetation, and whether they like it, whether they don't, and what are the important factors. The garden is a laboratory in some ways, not in a serious scientific sense, but it's a laboratory that allows me to test new plants, new combinations of plants, and then potentially apply those to some other aspects of my professional work. I also just want to create a place which is enjoyable to be in. So what makes me a little bit different perhaps from other people who design plantings in urban areas is that I wanted to utilise the plants in the wild as a sort of inspiration. I'm currently experimenting with a wide range of South African plants. I've been growing lots of species from seed over the last 10 years, and I visited South Africa a lot to look at actually these plants in their wild habitats. And the reason I'm interested in South African plants is that they're one of the groups of plants which are going to become much more useful in the future in a sort of climate change world. So as British cities warm, as the winters become less cold, many of these species will be really useful to us. South African plants I'm particularly interested in, firstly, some of the succulents. So there's a whole range of small succulents which you find at high altitude in South Africa, and some of them, these grow on my green roof, and they could be grown in lots of gardens in the UK. Gladiolus are another genus I'm really interested in. They've got a lot of potential in gardens. Historically, we think of them as these really large flowered ones which you buy in flower shops, which aren't really winter hardy. You just use them as a summer bulb. However, there's a whole range of species which are increasingly cold tolerant in Britain, and quite a few of those plants I've experimented with, reliable and really successful. In total, there's about 700 species in this garden. And I've tried to organise them in ways to create sort of perhaps dramatic effects which are, again, not so common in other gardens. With me, I tend to use plants as sort of repeating elements right across the garden, so they go back and forth, a bit like shoelaces, they stitch across. And nearly everything in the garden does that. And that just creates a different visual, because when that one thing flowers, there's normally quite a few of them, and they are present across the whole space. And that tends to generate much more of a dramatic feel than you would otherwise get. I really like the garden to have as long a flowering season as possible, and so one of the ways in which I've achieved that is by using layers of planting. So this is an example of the mid-layer species. It's an aster sedifolius. It comes from southern Europe. They form these nice domey sort of shapes. And then what we have coming out of that, in this one little spot, we have some of the emergent layer, the upper layer, and this is a gladiolus. This is Gladiolus ruby. Next to that, you have a dwarf form of Perovskia, which is also coming out of this layer. So you can see here you've got this sort of flat top layer, and then these things punching through. I really like these tall sort of naked stems. This is a Negapanthus. What I like about these top layer species is many of them are very architectural. And this is something you see a lot in the wild, in a lot of plant communities. These naked stems punching through. And if you look sort of behind me, I think you can see the effect in the rest of the garden of how those stems create a really interesting sort of visual rhythm. It's a way of trying to produce plantings which are perhaps manageable and are highly attractive to people, but they're also very useful for supporting biodiversity and wildlife in cities. The challenges from the 21st century as we become perhaps more urban, more dense, is how do we produce landscapes which can do all three of those things? And so this is one of the many possibilities in which how these things could come to pass. Because what
is so impressive about the work of James Hitchmore and others working in the same field is maximising the effect and the beauty in quite limited situations, particularly in inner city. Getting these plants to work so you can celebrate what's happening now, but very quickly replace it with more. And as they die back, they're not in any way diminishing the flowers that follow them, they're not suppressing them, and that can be a problem. To get that balance right with colour and shape and time and season is the endless fascination of gardening. And all the jobs that we do, the pruning back and the clipping and the planting, what have you, they are the means to the end. The end is always the performance. Good boy, come on. One of the things that we really enjoy doing here at Longmeadow is setting this table out with spring bulbs. We start off at the end of January, early February with irises, and we're working through it. Now the glory is that fritillaries, Fritillaria persica. We have the other little snake's head fritillaries coming through, and obviously these muscari, daffodils, as many as we can. And they add light and life to the harshest moments of spring. If you want spring bulbs, you have to plan ahead. But there are bulbs that you can plant now, either in a border or in a container, that are spectacular. Ones like gladioli, like cardiocrinums, or one of my favourites, lilies. Now, lily bulbs look very different from others because they don't have a protective outer layer. So if you think of an onion with all its layers, in this case they're scales that look like an artichoke. And when you're buying them, you want to look for nice plump bulbs and be quite careful because you can break them off. So that is very typically a lily. And this is my favourite lily of all. This is Lilium regali, the regal lily, which has 6-foot-tall stems topped by a glorious white trumpet of flower. Its fragrance will run right across the garden. Now, when you're growing them in pots, it is important to choose the right type of compost. I've got here a mix that I've made up of coir, leaf mould, a bit of grit. So what you want is a nice, loose, friable compost because then the roots get out and they do best under those circumstances. So you can see that that is actually less than half full. And I'm going to put 3 in a pot this size. They need to be covered over by about 4 or 5 inches of compost. Now, I have had letters from people saying that lilies are poisonous to cats. And if you're a cat lover, you may not want to grow lilies. Well, I'm a cat lover. I've grown lilies all my adult life, and I've had cats all my adult life, and the two have never come to any problems between them. Now, unlike some of the spring bulbs, lilies are a bit more temperate. They don't need protecting from the cold, but they need sheltering as they start to grow from wind and too much rain. And then they can be put where you want to enjoy them at their best, round about the end of May, beginning of June, and they will flower at the end of June and July. Well, that's a very simple job done, whose benefits will be magnificently apparent in high summer. And here are a few other jobs you can do this weekend. If you've sown early salad crops, like rocket, they'll be ready to prick out, and the principle applies to any seed that you sow. Wait until the seedlings have got 2 true leaves, that's leaves that look like the parent plant, and holding them by the leaf, not the stem, carefully ease them out of the compost with as much root as possible. They then need to go into an individual container. It could be a pot or a plug, but I'm using egg boxes to save plastic. Water them, put them somewhere protected to grow into sturdy plants that are big enough to plant outside. A couple of weeks ago, I planted some summer fruiting raspberries. But if you grow the autumn fruiting type and you haven't yet pruned them, this is something to get on with this weekend. Remove all last year's top growth, right down to the ground. And the new shoots will carry this year's harvest between late July and October. Most garden centres are selling tender bedding plants as plugs. But in many parts of the country, it's too cold to plant them out. But if you buy them now, pot them on and keep them protected, and a windowsill will do fine. And then plant them out when you're ready. You'll have nice, big plants that'll be very cheap to buy. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time today. But whatever you're doing, try and get outside and enjoy the Easter weekend, at least partly, in the garden. And I won't try and predict the weather because I've got it very wrong so far this year. But I do know that whether it be rain, sun, ice or snow, spring is unstoppable. These daffodils were poking out of the snow just a few days ago. We are off air next week, I'm afraid. But when we come back in a fortnight's time, at 8 o'clock, by the way, we are on for a full hour. And we will remain at a 60-minute programme for the rest of the year. So I'll see you back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks. Till then.